Carlos Nelson with Cascade Media Group, and today we have Esquire, Mr. Mickey Dean, and he's going to be talking about reparations. How are you doing this morning, Mickey?
Doing well, Carlos. Always glad to be with you on Cascade Media.
And Mickey, talk about the reparations issues and where we're at right now.
Well, to just start from where we are now, there's a phrase in the movement that reparations is an issue whose time has come. You know, for a long time, Carlos, and I know I've been with you before talking about reparations. Once upon a time, those of us who support reparations, if we had mentioned this 10, 12 years ago, you sort of get the side eye from people. You know, they'll look at you and say, yeah, you know, we deserve reparations, but right now it's a fantasy. What's happened, though, within the last decade or so, I think one of the significant events was in 2014 when Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article in Atlantic magazine on reparations. It got a lot of attention, and it really brought the subject of reparations to the forefront again, and everybody started talking about reparations. The other boost was during the 2020 Democratic presidential campaign, and this just may have been a campaign ploy, but 3 or 4 of the candidates said they would support reparations. In fact, they said they would support the legislation in Congress now, H.R. 40, to develop the Reparations Commission. And then I think the last thing, which sparked a lot of attention to a lot of Black issues, was the fallout from the George Floyd murder. And as you know, there was a lot of activity around the country based on that. And reparations was another issue that really got a lot of attention. It was in the aftermath of that we started a local reparations movement here in Kansas City, developed our Kansas City Reparations Coalition. And we've really been trying to push this issue of reparations locally since that time. And we're gradually having success. We're getting more and more people asking about reparations. We're getting more and more groups asking us to do presentations on reparations. So we've got a ways to go, but the movement is taking off here locally.
All right, so did a little homework last night, finally, and I looked at and listened to your last interview with us. It was November 5th, 2020, and you had talked about independent Black political party, and I wanted to know whether there's been any movement on that. And do you really think that Black people understand the difference between being an independent independent Black party and what that will do for Black people?
Well, I'm not really sure how that connects with reparations. I mean, that's kind of a different issue. The Independent Black Party, there are a lot of different perspectives on that. Ironically, this year is the 50th anniversary of the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana, which, by the way, Queen Mother Moore was at that convention, and she talked about reparations. But and there are a couple of commemorative independent political party events later this year, but you know, I think that's still a subject of debate. You know, we have a lot of our politicians still wedded to the Democratic Party, and we have a lot of folks saying that you know, that's just not has generated very much for us over the years, and that we do need an independent political party, or even a progressive party that may include more than Black people, but just something to wean progressive people, Black people, progressive people away from the Democratic Party. But that's an issue aside from reparations.
Yes, it was. But when I listened to our last interview, we talked about that not extensively, but quite a bit. And I thought bringing that back up, because in reparations, from my perspective, we still have to do something about gaining our own political power and our own economic base. And from my perspective, I think a lot of African Americans are interested in the reparations issue, and I'm more like, I think that's coming along, but where do we go from there from an economic perspective?
Well, I think that first of all, um, reparations right now, I think mostly is being fought on the legislative front, both nationally with HR 40 in Congress and in local governments. We're working on a proposal now that we're going to present to the mayor within another week or so. But the thing about legislative activity is that you're going to need people outside of the Black community. For example, in Congress now, you need 200 and I believe it's 218 votes to pass anything out of the House of Representatives. Well, we've got about 190 sponsors of HR 40, which is the reparations legislation, which means that there are a significant amount of whites, all Democrats, by the way, who support HR 40, who support reparations. In the cities where the most progress has been made with regard to reparations, Evanston, Illinois, Asheville, North Carolina, Providence, Rhode Island, those are predominantly white cities. But those are the ones that have made the most progress on reparations in terms of ordinances that have actually produced anything. None of the major cities have done that. Now there are some very significant ordinances, one in Los Angeles, one in San Francisco, that have set up commissions to study reparations. But if you look at the heavily Black cities, they're still lacking in that regard. So I'm saying all that to say that, even if we had an independent political party, to get anything accomplished through in the legislation field, you're still going to need other folks to ally with you. And I think the idea of an independent political party was particularly in local elections, you could really generate enough support. But mainly it was to have a place to concretize Black demands. Aside from other people's demands, what are the Black demands? And politically, what should we be fighting for as Black people? And then we can look at who's with us and who's not with us. And reparations as an issue is one that we can fight for as Black people, but we're going to need other folks to support that.
Tell me this, you made a real interesting observation that on the reparations and power issue, you can do that much easier locally than nationally. What do you think the problem is? Why the Black predominantly populations in the big cities, things haven't moved forward as fast as the other cities that you mentioned?
I think, and there's no consensus on this, but I think when you have a city that has a progressive administration with regard to white legislatures, and then you have a Black population that is not large enough to really be threatening. In other words, when you start talking about dollars and how do you support reparatory justice, it's a big difference in a place like Atlanta or Chicago as opposed to a place like Evanston, Illinois, where you only got about, I think, 12 or 13% of the population Black. Asheville, I think less than 20%. Providence, even less than that. So I think that in a lot of those smaller cities that have progressive legislative bodies, it's not as big a heavy a lift to say, let's do something for reparatory justice. Now, remember, municipalities can't really cover the debt. That's really a federal government responsibility, and that's why a lot of the focus is on the federal government. But I think that if you're talking about reparatory justice, in Atlanta and Chicago, Detroit, you're talking about a lot of dollars, and I think that might frighten some of the legislators, even though those cities have I think large amounts of Blacks in their legislative bodies. It's just that the inertia has been it's just been frustrating. And I've talked to people in those cities, and they're fighting hard just like we are. And they're making progress too, by the way. But it's just a tougher fight for whatever reason.
What took place when I think I called you 2 weeks ago on this reparations issue, and something was taking place here in Kansas City. You were going to some meetings and conferences. What was that all about?
Well, I think that there was, I think I remember there was one session that Trinity United Methodist Church held, and which is a predominantly white congregation, and they asked me to come do a presentation on reparations, because what we're trying to do in Kansas City is build a coalition that includes not only Black people but anybody that will support reparations. I think the other issue may have been we had a meeting with the mayor, and the mayor has basically said that he's willing to establish a commission to study proposals for reparations in Kansas City. What can Kansas City do? And so we're working on that. And as I said earlier, hopefully we'll be able to present that to the mayor, hopefully by the end of this week. And we'll see what happens from there. And that basically is to look at Kansas City historically in areas, the 5 areas: education, healthcare, economics, business development, criminal justice, and home ownership, to see historically what has Kansas City done, not only the government, but institutions and businesses, corporations in Kansas City. What have they done historically to prevent Black people from having success in those areas? And so we want to understand clearly what the harm has been, who has caused the harm, and then to try to develop some proposals for reparatory justice. So that's the purpose of this commission that hopefully we'll get started on setting it up through the mayor's office here in another week or so.
Is there anything that our local community can do to help support this effort?
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be, as you can imagine, a significant amount of opposition to reparations, and even among Black people, if not opposition, the support may not be as vigorous as we would like it. So one of the things that we're going to really need is for people to support our efforts and really put pressure on our politicians to really get behind this and see what we can do on a local level. Also, once we identify certain entities, for example, in home ownership, the role that the real estate companies have played with redlining, the role that the financial institutions have played in terms of mortgage lending discrimination over the years. All of those things have really set Black people back, because, as you know, home ownership is one of the main sources of wealth for most families. And the fact that we've been denied that contributes tremendously to the wealth gap, the tremendous wealth gap that we have between Blacks and whites. So a lot of this is going to be having people in the public express support for reparations in ways that we hope to have more of them in the future. But our role as a coalition really is to continue to bring this effort to our people, because a lot of Black people still really don't fully understand this issue of reparations. They don't understand the history of it. You hear things like, well, that was slavery, that was a long time ago, why we're still talking about it. So it's really, really a lot more education that we have to do among our people on reparations in order to get them to support. But we will be asking for support as time goes on.
Do you have any closing words for our audience?
Well, I think the main thing is to understand that we are owed, right? In addition to all of the free labor that Black people gave during the enslavement period, which, by the way, that the slave economics played a large role in building the wealth of this country, but it did end there. I mean, not only was there the enslavement period, but we had decades of Jim Crow, decades of discrimination in housing, healthcare. So it's been a continuing legacy from slavery that we're looking at in terms of reparatory justice. So I think that the wealth gap in this country is a direct result of that. I think that I've read studies that say that, because the white household wealth is about 10 times Black household wealth. And the estimate is that if we just do the type of programs that we do now, civil rights, affirmative action, empowerment zones, et cetera, it would take over 200 years to close that wealth gap. Most of us don't have 200 years. So we need something that's very, very specifically targeted to closing that wealth gap. And reparations is really the only thing that we see that could do that. And so that's why we have to convince people that this is something that they really have to fight for. And it's something that really can happen because it's beginning to happen in bits and pieces around the country.
I've left this out, and maybe I asked you for closing, but I'd like for you to give an example of how reparations would work, because different people, I've seen different explanations of what does that look like.
Well, when you mention reparations, the first thing that people think of is a check, right? But reparations can take so many different forms. For example, Evanston, Illinois is the only city so far that has actually begun to pay reparations. What they focused on was home ownership. Now, one of the things that was beneficial to Evanston was that at the time that the reparations movement was taking place, the state of Illinois legalized cannabis sales. And so basically the city council there said that they would take 10% of the sales tax on cannabis and devote that to reparations. So they didn't really have to dig into their current city budget. So that was an advantage that they had. And what they've done is that they've identified eligible Black citizens in Evanston, Illinois. They focused on home ownership, and they've already been started giving out amounts, $25,000 each to eligible Black families, either to put a down payment on a home or to repair an existing home. So this is one way that we've seen reparations being paid in the area of home ownership. It could be in education and scholarships. It could be in grants to businesses. I mean, there's just so many different ways that reparations could be. It could be a form of tax relief. So there's just lots of possibilities for reparations, and that's what these commissions are going to be studying, because it's way more than a check. Not to say that that's not a part of it, but it's way more than that.
Yeah, that's what from your conversation now, it's giving me even a clearer picture. Is 100 ways to do this, and do you think that they're in the future, if they come up with a solution that's going to be a one size fit all?
No, I don't think so. I think that and it's really on two levels. For the federal government, HR 40, that's a commission that will look at all of the possibilities, because the federal government has the major responsibilities. For cities are probably going to end up focusing on one area or another. Like, for instance, Evanston focused on home ownership. They didn't just hand out checks. They said, okay, $25,000 per family, per eligible family for home ownership. So you could see it, in cities focusing on different things, but there's just we just have to be creative in terms of what reparatory justice will ultimately look like. There are a lot of ideas floating around, and each city, as far as local reparations go, is going to have to decide what might be the most feasible for that city. The federal government, though, in HR 40 needs to really look at everything, the whole gamut of possibilities.
Well, I'm stealing Jim Watts' line again. It was a plum pleasing pleasure having you on the show. And we look forward to you updating our community on what's going on in the future.
The program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.